If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
A warm up from the above. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Riley Frain. He does such tremendous work over at the Portal Report, taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. I know that he has been doing a really good job of taking a look at what has been a very, very hard to decipher offseason, and we're going to be talking much about it. We're going to be talking about the fact that we have seen a lot of these Atlantic 10 teams really be able to rise up, doing a tremendous job of being able to just add talent in general. Additionally, we're going to be talking with him about what we have been seeing here in the offseason with regards to some of these coaching moves, which teams have been able to hit the ground running, which of these teams have not been able to hit the ground running as well. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you a roundup of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters ZM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And while we did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, we do have everything brought to you by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, are making sure that bettors are able to access their funds for all of their gambling needs 24/7, 365 on leap year, 366 days out of the year, because this is not anything that runs on credit or anything like that. It's just an account that you fund to be able to make sure that you have that money whenever you need it. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, type in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gives you a $1 match on your first deposit of up to $25. That is over at edgeboost.bet, promo code G-R-E-G. Now let's chat with our good friend Riley Frain. He does a great job over at the Portal Report, but this is a man that wears very many hats. We're certainly going to be talking about some of these mid-majors as well. He does some great written work over at Mid-Major Madness as well, so he's doing a great job there. He's based out there in the great state of New York. I know he spent some time out there in the Philly area. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Riley Frain. That is F-R-A-I-N all together. And Riley, it is great to be able to get you aboard. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Greg. I'm really excited for it. Like I said, I'm looking forward to talking some college hoops and transfer portal. We don't have games right about now, but always a really exciting time for college basketball nonetheless.
Oh, I'm right there with you, because the teams that we see in March, the teams that we see be able to make those runs to the NCAA tournament, they are being built right now. And Riley, just how have you gauged this transfer portal as compared to past years? Because obviously we've seen a record amount of guys enter in the transfer portal, and all of a sudden guys like, I'm looking at you, Malik Thomas, who are fishing for eligibility, they're getting that eligibility. And I just feel like with regards to the transfer portal, it's just taking more and more time now this year rather than in past years for these teams to be able to get everything all set up, just because of the sheer amount of guys that are in the portal.
Yeah, it's definitely been a chaotic offseason, and I think you hit the nail on the head sort of, Greg, with the two main issues being that, we have tons of guys entering the transfer portal, who don't have eligibility left, sort of, in hopes of being granted an extra year of eligibility with the pending NCAA lawsuit. Second thing being just we've had, because of that, by nature of those guys entering the portal, looking for that extra year, we've had so many more guys enter the portal. I think, it's topping out almost at 2,500, which, as you mentioned, is got to be a record number. And a lot of that is sort of just by nature of how much the transfer portal has grown over the past couple of years. What's been different about it this offseason, again, another thing you mentioned, Greg, is just kind of how slowly it's all begun to trickle out. I know we've seen a lot of big names commit early in the offseason, but there's still tons of guys left available in the portal outside of the guys who are sort of searching for that extra year of eligibility. And so, it's created a really interesting dynamic. We still have a lot of coaches who are recruiting the transfer portal heavy, a lot of interesting names to kind of talk about that are still available in the portal. Been a lot more chaotic, a lot more, fast-paced than the past off seasons.
Yep, and I think that the biggest beneficiaries of so many of these guys being in the portal are these new coaches as well, because with the new coaches, it's just so difficult, in my opinion, to try to hit the ground running when you take a job like 48 hours later, you're out there gauging the transfer portal. And I think that that's been a big benefit to some of these guys, like a Richard Pitino over there at Xavier. I think that Fordham with Mike Magpayo, he has done a really good job of bringing in some talent over the last few days. Look no further than Sacramento State with Shaquille O'Neal starting to sign some of these guys as well. And I think that they've been some of the biggest beneficiaries of this year in the transfer portal, because these teams that have that have new coaches, typically it takes them a little bit of time to get things going via the portal, but with the breadth of different guys that are in the portal, that allows them to be able to still have their pick of the litter.
Yeah, I think with the coaching hires this offseason, it's been really about timing. It seems like the programs that went out ahead of time and maybe who preemptively knew they were going to have an open head coaching slot this offseason were able to bring in a new candidate early in the offseason to kind of hit the portal running. And you mentioned it, they've been the big beneficiaries of it this offseason. Whereas maybe some guys got hired a little late in the offseason while the transfer portal was kind of already in progress and underway. They're struggling a little bit. So the coaching hires, there's sort of two sides to that. But as you mentioned, Greg, we've definitely seen that some of those coaches who have come in early in the offseason have hit the ground running in the transfer portal and have really just benefited from sort of all the development surrounding it and, the increased number of guys we're seeing enter this offseason.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It has been a wild offseason, to say the least. That's Riley Frain. He's doing a great job over at the Portal Report along with Mid-Major Madness. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and you are a part of Mid-Major Madness, so I do have to bring this up. Who are some of the schools that are outside the Power Conference level that you feel like have done a really good job here in the offseason? Because we're all highlighting what we've been seeing out of schools like BYU, and very rightfully so, but I do think that there are some mid-major schools, like High Point has been certainly one that I've been highlighting on this podcast, that I feel like have done a really good job of just being able to bring in some fresh talent and really being able to reload.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you asked, Greg. I mean, you mentioned it. I do write for Mid-Major Madness. I do a lot of work over there. So the mid-majors certainly mean a lot to me. I'd love to start with the A10. I mean, I know they're sort of in that higher tier of mid-major programs, however you want to kind of rank them. But some of the teams that have kind of stood out there for me, I mean, George Mason has been dominant in the portal under Tony Skinn, who's taken over there. To mention a couple guys they've brought in, they've got Dula Adebayo coming over from Mount St. Mary's, who was an NCAA tournament guy. Jeremiah Hill from Ball State, who averaged, I think, almost 16, 17 points per game there. A couple other guys like Masai Troutman from Northeastern, a lot of experience. Nick Ellington from Murray State, a lot of experience as well. George Mason, a program that I think has found a lot of success in the transfer portal. I know over at the Portal Report, we've got the class inside of our top 10 transfer portal class rankings. So certainly a lot of success competing amongst the high majors in the transfer portal this year. The Patriots are. Following them, I mentioned at the A10, just finding a lot of success. George Washington, another program that's doing really well. I know they bought in Gene Aaron Gurin from Hofstra, another guy that you got to talk about there in terms of who they bought in this offseason. Trey Dinkins coming over from Duquesne, an interconference transfer. Tyrone Marshall from Western Kentucky. The George Washington class is coming together really nicely. I could sit here and highlight sort of the A10 and the success they've found in the transfer portal all this offseason. VCU, you got to mention, I talked about the coaching changes just a moment ago, and they bring in Phil Martelli Jr. from Bryant this offseason, who's had a lot of success there over the past couple of years, and he's able to hit the ground running in the transfer portal with a handful of additions this offseason. St. Louis under Coach Schertz, once again finding a lot of success in the portal as well. So the A10 certainly sort of the pinnacle of mid-majors, finding success in the transfer portal right there. But if I could maybe step outside the A10 very quickly, another team I'd love to highlight, and I was tweeting about recently on my personal account, has been UNC Wilmington. We're sort of jokingly, affectionately calling them the CAA Avengers, the way they've sort of cultivated transfer talent from around the conference. Just to name a few guys, they're bringing in CJ Luster from Stony Brook. They're bringing in Christian May from Towson. They're bringing Madison Durr from Monmouth, and a couple more guys I'm missing out on just to save a little time. But UNC Wilmington has sort of been cultivating talent from all around the Coastal Athletic Association, and Coach Takio Siddle has really done a good job rebuilding in the transfer portal this offseason.
Well, I have noticed that one as well, and that's been a lot of fun. And over the last, I'm going to call it 72, 96 or so hours, speaking on the Coastal Conference, I've been very impressed by what Campbell has been able to do as well. They got a little bit of a slow start to things, as we know. That's a bit of a program in transition, and I would say that they were one of the more surprising mid-majors in all of college basketball last season as well. Got off to a little bit of a rough start to the season, then they were really able to have themselves a nice, shall we say, January into early February, bringing in likes of Jeremiah Johnson, Quentin Mincy. I think that this is one of the more undervalued classes out there in the country, especially with Enoch Cullum coming on over from Western Kentucky over the last about 72 or so hours.
Yeah, really exciting class. You mentioned a couple of the guys there. I'd love to throw into that conversation Munir Newton, who I think was a really solid out defensive sort of guard wing at Delaware State. I think he could be really impactful on that level. Chris Fields, of course, from Norfolk State, is going to provide some solid minutes. I think he averaged almost 9 points per game there. I really like what the new coaching staff is developing there with the coaching change and sort of they're losing a handful of talent talented guys to the portal, Colby Duggan, Nolan Dorsey. But yeah, I really like what they're sort of doing to rebuild with this roster so far. It seems like they're in the mix for a couple more guys, sort of available in the transfer portal as well. I know, they've sort of got a whole roster to rebuild down there this offseason with a whole new coaching staff, but another really exciting CAA team, of course, Greg, and I really like what they're doing in the portal too.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned Kobe Duggan because he goes on over to Charleston, and that's another program that I feel like is getting it right. I feel like Chris Mack is building up that Charleston program, and I think that you'd agree with me. A lot of these schools that they don't have football, they've really been able to take advantage, utilize that NIL sort of funds, all the money that they are able to save on football, prioritize that to basketball. And I just think that the CAA in general is going to be rock solid with who you mentioned in UNC Wilmington. They've been the creme de la creme in terms of transfer portal classes, but when you're able to bring in Kobe Duggan, Jalen Counter, and Connor Hickman into that backcourt, you're doing something right in the portal.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more to that class as well. But
Christian Reeves, yeah.
Yeah, just the way Chris Mack has been, rebuilding. Last year they were successful. He's done a good job of sort of carrying it over from the Pat Kelsey era. You mentioned it. A lot of these schools, that don't have to carry on football, we're seeing it sort of, around the A-10 as well, as I just kind of spoke on not too long ago. But a lot of these schools who don't have to, deal with sort of the football, the NIL there, and all the money that has to go into that are maybe starting to find some early success in the transfer portal. Now, I imagine that sort of starts to balance out over the, as time goes on and, over the coming seasons and all that. But I think for the time being, we're seeing teams like Charleston, some of the A-10 teams I just mentioned, really take advantage of some of the early transfer portal stuff going on.
Yep, I'm right there with you as Riley Frain, who does such a tremendous job over at the Portal Report, does great work over at Mid-Major Madness. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and as we know, these coaching hires, they have been so prominent. We talked about it, these coaches being able to hit the ground running, and who have been just some of the biggest coaching moves that you've seen in the offseason that you just feel like are going to work, because it just comes to my mind here at the top that the Big Ten has done an amazing job with regards to this just sort of coaching hiring cycle, bringing in Nico Medved, Indiana going with Darren DeVries, obviously Ben McCollum going to Iowa. I thought those were 3 home run hires. The Big East obviously was able to fortify things. I really like the signings of Willard along with Patino over at Xavier, but are there a few others that come to mind that maybe they're not getting talked about as much, but you just really like what they're doing and you think that they could be successful from the jump?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first guy you got to mention that I don't think you put there in the conversation, Greg, was Eric Olean, who's taken a job at New Mexico. I mean, we consider them a mid-major, at Mid-Major Madness just by nature of who we cover. We like to, sort of provide programs we feel who are undervalued as much coverage as we can. That's just sort of our overall goal. But, we could go back and forth all day on if the Mountain West is a mid-major conference or not. New Mexico, Richard Pitino from New Mexico, who just left there and did a great job over the past couple seasons, who you just mentioned in sort of your intro there. But I love this. You go from one sort of historic figure at head coach in Richard Pitino, who did a great job, took them to back-to-back NCAA tournaments. And I think you bring in, sort of a really good hiring to back that up. Someone who, maybe it wasn't as prevalent in the national radar just by, nature of he came from UC San Diego, but a guy who nonetheless is highly valued as a really good coach, who has a lot of experience, who's, sort of touted as a program builder. He's been with UC San Diego since 2013 and has sort of helped them rebuild and has brought them to multiple NCAA tournaments. And, we got to see him on the national stage this year, up a good fight at the NCAA tournament with UC San Diego. So I really like sort of what he's been able to do this offseason. Just overall, he's a head coach I really like. He's a guy who I think could be really successful. And I think, he landed at a good spot in New Mexico. And, that's a program we're going to see find some success over the next couple of years in the transfer portal as well.
Yep, we have already seen New Mexico do a solid job there. Bringing in JT Rock, I thought was solid. They were able to bring in a few transfers on over from USC as well, and the Patton brothers, so that was nice. They just landed to Javius Miller as well, 6th man of the year out there in the Summit League, so I'm right there with you. And I mean, just speaking a little bit further on the Mountain West as well, I really like what Colorado State has been able to do over the last few weeks as well. They bring in Ali Faroukmanesh, who you remember that name because he was the man that knocked down that big 3 for Northern Iowa when they took down Kansas in the NCAA tournament. But for Colorado State, it had a little bit of a slow go of it in the transfer portal to start out with, but I think that they brought in some nice pieces. Jevin Munoz, who comes on over from Florida Gulf Coast, is a guy that I like. Brandon Rechsteiner shouldn't have probably seen as many minutes as he did at Virginia Tech, but now he's a year older and wiser as well. And a guy like a Kerry Booth just doesn't typically land in the Mountain West, and I feel like for Ali Faroukmanesh, even though he got a slow start to the offseason, he's done a really good job of being able to put this roster together.
Yeah, and another guy I love that they bought in this offseason, Josh Pasquarelli. Had the opportunity to watch him a couple times at Marist this past season as a sophomore, averaging 15.6 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, and contributing all over the floor. So you sort of went through the brunt of that transfer class. Javen Munitz, another guy I'm really high on, and I thought was really successful at Florida Gulf Coast this past season. A solid 3-point shooter with good size on the wing, and another double-digit guy. So we could kind of run down that transfer class as well. But I think you sort of touched on the majority of it. I really like what Colorado State's doing this year. I think they're going to be competitive in the Mountain West.
Yep, I'm right there with you as Riley Frain, who does such great work over at Mid-Major Madness, along with the Portal Report. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and we have to address this because I know that you've done some great work in the past with the Atlantic 10. I know that you've done some great work with St. Joe's. How would you evaluate their class? Because I know that you were talking highly about the Atlantic 10. You were talking about George Mason. You're talking about George Washington. They've really sold in the headlines, but also do think that VCU, another team that you touched upon, they've done a good job as well. But I really look at this entire conference doing a solid job. And for St. Joe's, it's going to be a little bit of a transition. They don't have the full backcourt that they had a season ago. But this is a team that over the last few seasons has done a solid job of hitting the portal line. Even though they don't necessarily have a sheer, massive amount of guys they're going to be coming in, I do feel like they brought in some of the right guys for the system.
Always happy to talk about my Hawks. The tough thing this offseason has been sort of losing our three leading scorers in Eric Reynolds, who is out of eligibility and departing for hopefully a pro career. We've got Rasheer Fleming, who's a solid NBA draft candidate and seems like a potential first-round pick this year. And then Xavier Brown, who of course is transferring over to Oklahoma and getting a chance at the high major ranks in the SEC. Interested to see what he could do there. Just of course, quick shout out. But I think in terms of the A10 and St. Joe's and where that transfer class is kind of ranking right now, it's solid. But I think it's flying a little under the radar. And the reason for that being is St. Joe's has kind of bought in, and I'll run through the names in a moment, but St. Joe's has kind of bought in a couple guys who were sort of more highly rated prospects coming out of high school, didn't get a ton of playing time at the high major ranks, and are now sort of taking a step down, in search of more playing time. And just, as we've seen, with the growth of the transfer portal, guys are always looking for an opportunity to get more playing time. And sometimes when you start out at the high major ranks, that comes by nature of taking a step down to a conference like the A10. And I think St. Joe's is a great spot for that. So some of the guys they bought in this offseason, Al Amadou, who's coming over from Marquette, played a little bit his freshman year, but went on to redshirt this year, a local Philly guy, and really excited about his addition. He adds a lot of length in the front court, 6'10". St. Joe's is going to need a little bit of that with losing a guy like Rasheer Fleming to the NBA draft, who was an important piece in the front court. On top of that, they're adding Jaden Glover, who was a top 100 recruit at coming out of high school last offseason. He comes over from St. John's. Didn't play a ton his freshman year, but again, sort of provides a ton of potential as a former 4-star recruit. A guy St. Joe's fans are really excited for. He's going to pair up in the backcourt nicely with Derek Simpson, who came over from Rutgers last offseason. Greg, you mentioned St. Joe's finding some past success in the transfer portal as well. And then sort of rounding out the class, a guy who's really St. Joe's fans are going to be really excited about is Deuce Jones, sort of an interconference transfer coming over from LaSalle, an inter Big Five transfer too, for those who are familiar with the Philadelphia basketball scene. He won A10 Rookie of the Year, Deuce Jones. He was averaging 12.5 points per game, 4.2 rebounds, and sort of carried that LaSalle team for stretches at times. So he's a Philly guy. He understands sort of what it takes to compete in the A10, the level of the conference, and what it's going to take to be a part of and compete with a program like St. Joe's. And so I think you sort of combine those three, and again, it's a transfer class that's flying a little under the radar when you sort of look at the overall scheme of the A10 and what the league has been able to do in the transfer portal this year. But I think it's a transfer class that's really going to excite St. Joe's fans, and I don't think they're not quite done in the portal. I certainly think there's, from sort of reports and everything like that, there's a couple more guys they're interested in and are actively pursuing, potentially looking to add to the roster for this offseason. So a really exciting trio that they bought in so far, and I'm excited to see sort of what Deuce Jones, what Glover can do in the backcourt, and what Amadou adds to the front court as well.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well. How long do you think it's going to take for a lot of these schools to be able to fill out their rosters? Because we mentioned that St. Joe's most likely not done in the portal, and let's call it what it is. Most of these teams not done in the portal, and how long do you think it's going to take for a lot of these teams to be able to fill out their rosters? Because we're not quite seeing the 100-plus guys coming off the board like we were seeing a few weeks ago, but there's still a lot of guys out there, and there's still a lot of teams that even if they might have most of their starting roster taken care of, they might need one more starter, and there's a lot of teams that are looking for some depth as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of an interesting dichotomy between high major, mid major, and low major for this. For the most part, a lot of the high major teams that, maybe didn't go through have a little more stability, didn't have to deal with a coaching change this offseason, or a lot of roster turnover. I think a lot of them are going to be pretty set already. I'm looking at Indiana, who I know dealt with the coaching change this offseason with DeVries, but they've got, I think, 10 or 11 guys coming into the portal this offseason, and you have to imagine that roster is pretty much set for the most part. So, again, just going back to my original point, I think for the most part, your high major teams, outside of a couple of players who are going to trickle in here and there. Your rosters are going to be, for the most part, 80 to 90% set at this point, with a couple guys taking last minute visits. I know we're sort of seeing some guys like Desmond Cloud from USC who hit the transfer portal this offseason, his recruitment kind of play out over the past couple weeks. PJ Haggerty, who's in the NBA draft process, we're sort of seeing a lot of high majors go after him. So there's between, sort of guys who are maybe late trickled into the portal, who are still kind of fielding some late visits and stuff like that, and, maybe guys who are evaluating their NBA draft prospects. I think most of the high major rosters are set sort of outside of those two camps. Now, for mid-majors, I think you're still seeing a lot of active recruitment. Conferences like the CAA, the MAC, Conference USA, the Big West, sort of the ASUN, anyone sort of around that conversation, you're still seeing active in the transfer portal outside of a few, I think, really specific candidates. Maybe some of the ones I even mentioned, like a George Mason, has done a lot of work in the transfer portal already. I imagine they are fairly set. With Sal over in the A10 as well, already bought in, I think, 8 or 9 different transfers, have a couple freshmen coming in under a new head coach, and so I'd imagine their roster's pretty set as well. Now, if we want to take it down even one tier further, if I can, talking low major, I think you still have a lot of low major programs sort of actively recruiting the transfer portal, talking about programs who are maybe moving up to Division I this year, maybe the SWAC or conferences like that, sort of looking for some of those guys who trickled in late into the portal, looking for maybe some steals who are sort of looking to take a step down from the high major ranks in terms of getting some extra minutes, and sort of guys in that category. So yeah, there's definitely still actively some recruiting going on. I think for the most part, a lot of the high major recruiting and some of the top prospects have sort of fleshed themselves out, but maybe outside of, the guys who are hoping to get some extra eligibility, a couple of guys who are available in the draft, and maybe some guys who entered really late into the transfer portal cycle. I think maybe over within the next couple of weeks, we'll sort of start to see everything really flesh out. Just all of the college basketball programs sort of filling 80 to 90% of their roster.
Yep, no question about it. It's going to be a bit of a process for a lot of these schools, but we are going to be seeing a lot of fun that it's going to be going down the next few weeks as these teams, they start to be able to fill everything out. And Riley, you're doing a great job of keeping your finger on the pulse of it all over there at the Portal Report. I know that you guys are doing tireless work, because if you miss a few hours of Portal combat, you miss a whole lot this time of year. So You guys are doing a great job there. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media to other platforms.
Of course. First off, Greg, thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it. I really appreciate all your kind words. As Greg kind of mentioned, you can find all of my work at Mid-Major Madness on Twitter, at mid_madness, as sort of the title implies. We do a lot of mid-major college basketball coverage, men's and women's. Love the work we do there, and I'm very passionate about mid-major basketball. So check out sort of the work we're doing there. The other spot you can find me at is the Portal Report, where we're sort of, as you mentioned, Greg, keeping on the pulse of college basketball's transfer portal and doing as much coverage as we can there. This is, as you can imagine, a very hectic time of year for us. So you can find that at the Portal Report on Twitter. And then my personal is just at Riley Frain on Twitter, covering college basketball all the time, whether it be mid-majors, transfer portal, all different kinds of stuff. Come check it out if you're sort of into college basketball, which, if you're here listening to Greg's show, I would imagine you are. So just again, thank you so much for having me, Greg. I really do appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And we do appreciate Riley and all the good work that he's doing. Taking a look at what we're all getting in the transfer portal right now, as we've got a lot of movement, and they're doing a great job of keeping us straight over there at the Portal Report. So big thanks to Riley for joining me on Cubs Go Soups, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, let's take a look at all the news that we've seen in college basketball over the last 24 hours.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it was great to be able to get Riley Frain aboard, who does great work over at the Portal Report, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We have seen about 1 trillion transfers thus far in the offseason. He and the guys over there at the Portal Report are doing a great job of rounding them all up, so it was great to be able to get his insights aboard. A big thanks to Riley for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we've seen in college basketball over the last 24 hours, and we saw this man decide that he is going to be going to Northeastern. Harris Elovich, he was over at West Virginia last season, a man that was a little bit of an international man of mystery coming in, and this was someone that I did not think was going to be seeing a lot of minutes last year. 6'8" gentleman that really doesn't pop it a lot from three-point range. He saw action in 13 games, less than 2 points per contest, so a little bit more of an upside get there. We'll see what he's going to be able to do at Northeastern. A Northeastern team that, in my opinion, they did need to add a little bit more of something down low after they lost Chris Daughtry last season. You could tell that they just weren't necessarily stout down low, and they've got a lot of transfers that they need to replace as well for Northeastern. It's just a program that has fallen on a little bit of tough times. This is sort of a low-risk, high-reward sort of pickup. These are the sorts of things that you want if you're a school like Northeastern, especially with these teams like Charleston, UNC Wilmington and company just being a muscle up in the conference. So I do like this pickup for them, and I don't know if it's necessarily going to yield a whole bunch of fruits or anything like that, but you know what, it is a very much a step in the right direction for them, and I think that this is also a step in the right direction. Florida, they're adding Anquan Bolden Jr. For those that know my Twitter/X feed at @GUnit_81, the 81 is actually an homage to Anquan Bolden, who was, I believe, the toughest wide receiver I've ever seen in my life. He was very awesome. He played at Florida State for his college football. Anquan Bolden Jr. now playing for Charlie Ward, a Florida State alum over at Florida A&M. Last year at Buffalo, he was able to average about 8 points per contest. He was a starter for them as well. Now, three-point shooting was less than 30%, so if you're not going to be a main facilitator, you're going to need to work on that a little bit. But out there at Florida A&M in the SWAC, I think that he's going to do a really nice job of being able to tear it up at Buffalo out there in the MAC, a MAC school that is just not getting anything going whatsoever. Was a little bit less than savory there, but I do think that this is a very good pickup for them. I do think that for Florida A&M, they're building some nice inroads here. I like the pickup that they had of Jamel Matlib as well, so this is going to be big for them moving forward, and man, I do think that for Florida A&M, bringing in Charlie Ward, that was very good on that front. Matthew Von Coleman, 7'4" big man. He has decided that he is going to be going to Marshall. He's been generating about 2.3 blocks, 8 rebounds per contest last season, shot north of 70% from the floor. This is a really good pickup for a Marshall team that all of a sudden has been able to do a great job of being able to mix and match with regards to big men that they've been able to bring in, like the fact that they had Nate Martin along with Obina Onchile Killian over the last few seasons. Those guys were very rock solid for them. Bringing in a 7'4" guy in Von Coleman, I think is very big. And for Marshall, what they've actually done a relatively solid job of is being able to keep some of their own as well, as they did have a few guys explore the transfer portal. They've got much of that backcourt from a season ago that is going to be coming back. If I'm not mistaken, Jalen Spear, who was able to average double figures in the conference portion of the season last year, he's going to be back. Wilson Dubinsky, he's a guard that comes in from South Carolina State. He's able to shoot it relatively well from three. He's going to be entering as well. So nice haul for Marshall. Do like to be able to see that for them. And I also do like to see the fact that you've got this man heading on over to Wyoming. Loveland Walker, he was last season over at Florida Atlantic. We give our to Lane Kiffin, go Elves, averaging about 9 points, 4.5 assists, a steal per contest. He's going to be heading on over there. And when he was over at Eastern Kentucky a few seasons ago, he was averaging closer to about 15.5 points per game for Wyoming. Really, other than Obi Ejum, they really had no offense whatsoever out there in the backcourt. It was very much less than savory for them. Season number 1, but Sundance Wicks, he is a heck of a coach. And for Loveland Walker, not a guy that's going to light you up from three-point. Your career 32% three-point shooter. Last year over at FAU, he was averaging about 29.5% for three-point, but is a guy that's able to do a nice job of being able to throw out the ball. Wyoming had a little bit of a tough time with regards to assist-to-turnover ratio last season as well, so bringing in a guy like this, I think is going to be able to help out with that moving forward, and I do like this pickup for them, and I also like this pickup as you've got Devin Ree, who's going to be going on over to Jackson State. The SWAC having themselves a nice day, as for Ree, last season, it's not like he was amazing or anything like that. At 6'8", he was averaging in the neighborhood about 4.3 rebounds per contest, but he's a guy that began his career over at Louisville, and for a school like Jackson State, being able to bring in a big guy like Ree, where you just don't have a lot of big men in this conference whatsoever. He's a 6'8" former top 150 recruit pretty much across the board. This is a really nice pickup for them. I still remember 2 seasons ago over at Louisiana Tech, he was also able to shoot north of 40% from three. That dipped all the way to 27% this past season, but guy that I think has some versatility, has some upside for Jackson State having Mo Williams, yes, that Mo Williams that used to play in the NBA, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of upside there, so do like to see that. And then you've got Chance Stevenson. He was last season playing over at Maryland. He only was able to see action in 7 games. That actually began his career over at Loyola Marymount. While he was over at Loyola Marymount, 6 points per contest, shot 37% from 3-point. He's signing on over to Minnesota. Now, I don't think that he's going to be any sort of a starter for Minnesota, and if he's seeing major minutes for Minnesota, well, the Niko Medved system right now is not looking the world's greatest, and I do think that Niko Medved was a very good coach, because you just take a look at the guys that they're bringing in. BJ Omot 2 seasons ago was very rock solid over at North Dakota, couldn't quite get out there on the floor for Cal. This past season, Robert Viola is a rock solid rim protector and a nice low post piece from San Jose State. Chancey Willis was that top scorer over at Western Michigan. Last season, Jalen Crocker Johnson, he was the all OVC Rookie of the Year 2 seasons ago. Bobby Durkin, he's a guy that at 6'7" is able to pop in a lock it from 3-point range from Davidson as well. So I like what Minnesota's been able to build. I really like Niko Medved as a coach. I think that this is going to be a solid depth piece for them. I do like what Minnesota is building out there. And what I love is just coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, because even though we don't have games for another 6 months, teams that are able to win in the NCAA tournament, those bets that you're able to win in March, they're done through great prep time and great just research in general, and I'm looking to be able to do that for you guys right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, as I'll be with you guys every single day, regular season and off season, on this podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind the RCM, the name does not matter, so per usual, please just send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast, that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Riley Frain, who does great work over at the Portal Report. He joined me in last segment, and I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.